What is up, Internet basketball junkies? Coach Hack here. I'm with Coach Kramer. We're meeting this morning to talk about post player drills. We got drills for big men queued up. Coach, you ready to talk some big men drills today?
Let's talk some big men drills. We haven't done that kind of thing. It's been a lot of plays and things, and I guess just like in games, sometimes you forget about the big men. So let's give them some time on the air here today.
I'm pretty sure I remember you telling me at one point that the only purpose for big men was to rebound your guards' 3-point misses and throw it back out to them. Is that a true statement, or am I making that up?
I mean, that's I thought that's kind of what we were going to talk about today. I mean, listen. I got a whole collection of guys that played for me that we could bring on here that would tell you that's exactly what big men are for. So. Um, we may dig a little deeper, and I will tell you this: I had some guys that could play, those what you call typical big positions when I was at the schools in Ohio. But the one that I had in Georgia, he'd come through the screen if he was watching it right now, and remind you that that's not exactly true, Coach Kramer. When you got 6'10" and talented and 6'9", it's they're for more than just rebounding your missed shot. So let's give them their due respect here today.
I've coached some good big men in my coaching career. I had Christian Parker at Glen Oak, who ended up going to Mount Union, I think becoming Mount Union's all-time leading scorer. He had a really nice career over there. I had a guy early in my coaching career who was very much a developmental success, where I got to the school and that you could tell there was some material there to work with. He was about a 6'3" kid, but he couldn't handle the ball without traveling. He could block shots, he could rebound, he could do a lot of the things you wanted. But we trained him up on some pivoting and some footwork, got him sound with the ball, and he ended up being a like conference player of the year type of player, basically giving us like a double. And he really couldn't handle the ball when we first got him. I've coached some good big men, but I also enjoy developing big men into a role that can be functional for our team, even if there's not a lot of natural talent there. So our center position and some of the systems that I've used through the years can be very effective as a 5-man, just learning to rim run and set screens and roll hard to the basket. And I've always felt like through drill work, you can train those kind of things, and those things can be accentuated by talent and size and skill. But just having somebody that can execute a role is important from a standpoint of being a 5 or being a big man. Tell me about a few of the big men that you've coached in your coaching career.
Well, I mean, the obvious one that I've come up first was when I was in Georgia, living in that other world, and I was living in down there. I had a 6'10" big named Chris Lewis, whose dad played for the Jets for 13 years, Mo Lewis. Look that name up if you want to see how he impacted the NFL for 20 years. His dad was the guy that hit Drew Bledsoe and knocked him out of the game, and it forced Belichick to put Tom Brady in the game for the first time. So I coached his 2 kids, and Chris was his youngest. He's 6'10" big. He was an ESPN top 30 kid, if I'm not mistaken. Had scholarships to all the big schools. Chris was an interesting case. He was a very cerebral player. In fact, when we were going really well, he had a big game at this Arby's Classic tournament where we knocked off CPA. They'd won like 37 straight games, and they were talking about Chris. He played such a big role, and they wanted to give him a nickname. And I said, but he'd rather be in a science class than be on the basketball floor. He was an engineering major. And so they nicknamed him the Big Nerd, right? Which I thought was pretty funny. And he actually embraced it. That's just the kind of kid he was. Physically very gifted, too. 6'10", had the body of an NBA guy the day I met him when he walked in the gym for the first time as a sophomore. And he just was very coachable. Big hands, ran like a deer. And some of the things that you were talking about, really with Chris is what kind of resonates with me when I think back to his game. He did a great job with the rim run. He was excellent in screen and roll, short roll hard to the basket. He could pop a little bit, but that wasn't his thing. Pretty good free throw shooter, great rim protector on the defensive end. But, man, he was really, really good at that rim run because he was really, really fast and big. So, obviously he had scholarships to all the schools. I mean, there was not – I think Kansas, Kentucky, and North Carolina were the only 3 that didn't really pursue him hard. He maybe wasn't quite in that air, but Chris was an interesting case because he shunned all those. His life goal was to take courses at MIT, believe it or not. So he went to Harvard and played for Tommy Amaker, and he went in their engineering program there. And when he was finished with that, he took some courses at MIT. He left Harvard with a software engineering degree and started working at Facebook. And just recently, Oculus hired him away to help them continue to develop something called the Meta Universe, which I have no idea about. But that was Chris. Yeah. That was Chris, and he was the one that was obviously the best big man I ever coached. But I coached the one that you were talking about, a developmental kid that you were talking about. Those are a lot of fun. I had one at Fairless early in my career named Nick Smith, who was about 6'3", just like you mentioned, and he was just a raw athlete when we got a hold of him. Jumped really well. I'd be lying if I told you I knew what his vertical was, but he was a dunker at 6'3". He'd dunk it on you. But man, he when he got his footwork together, and I think that's where we're going with this today. Chris had been trained right from the time he was old enough to get in the gym. Nick was very raw, so it was our deal to train him. And watching how the drills with the footwork and all the things that go with it, help a big man develop their game offensively was really one of the more gratifying development stories that I've ever gone through in my career. So, I've kind of seen both ends of it.
Well, Coach, before we get into the big men drills, I wanted to throw up a clip on screen that's been going kind of viral on social media and get your reaction to it. And I don't know the exact details of what we're looking at, but we're looking at a late game situation here, and I believe about a regional tournament situation of high school basketball. And this is girls basketball we're going to look at. I'm going to play it, and then we'll talk about it. You ready?
Mm-hmm. I actually think I saw this. Yeah, there's one. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, I actually watched this yesterday.
How much sleep are you getting that night if you're coaching that team?
Yeah, a better question would be 10 years from now, how much sleep would I be getting? Because it still wouldn't be very much, right?
Boy, 3 buckets in a 4-second stretch to 5-second stretch there to take the lead for the first time in the game, in a tournament game of all things, nonetheless.
I mean, gosh, we're not there, right? We're not in the gym with these people. I don't know the coaches. I've got no skin in this game. But like my first thought is anything but what you did there would have been good. Take the ball and throw it the length of the floor and let them have it and guard them would have been better, right? I mean, yeah, it's brutal. And again, you're talking about, I'm looking at the crowd. Clearly that's a deep run tournament game. So these kids are, they're obviously well coached because they've run that deep.
Yeah.
There's really no words for that. We all have a moment in our coaching careers, and I've got one. It's not quite that extensive, that keeps me up at night sometimes. And I think back to, wow, what if, we had just done better with this one thing. But that's a lot of sleepless nights there. I have no words.
Yeah, that's what I want. That's what I really wanted to get to with this is take me back to an experience in your coaching career when a team you were coaching had a meltdown. It happens to coaches. It's not a sign that whoever's coaching this team didn't do a good job. Sure, they would like to call a timeout if they had one. I can remember a situation we were playing Medina in one of these holiday classics or something, and it's like 2 heavyweights. We're 2 of the biggest public schools in Northeast Ohio. We were both huge. Our rosters, I didn't coach teams as big as some of your Milton teams, but my biggest Glen Oak teams were, 6'6", 6'5", 6'5" across the front line. Medina's all big, strong kids, and we botched a 6-point lead, I think, in the last maybe 45 seconds of the game, mostly related to turnovers against the press and turnovers in the half court. And it's just one of those things where it's like, what just happened? We were in control of that game, and all of a sudden now we're down one, trying to draw up a game-winning play. Do you have a situation similar to this in your coaching career where your team had a meltdown?
Yeah. Why do you do this to me? I mean, first of all, today I'm wearing my district championship T-shirt from our rebuilding project in 2007, because it's on Monday, I think it's March 10th, is the 19-year reunion for that team, right? So we're almost to 20 years of a group of kids that I never loved a group of kids more, right? And this is the hard part of tournament basketball, because the greatest single moment, the most euphoric moment of my coaching career, the storybook Disney night of my coaching career, was followed, right, 5 days later by this thing that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's how hard it is. We were following that district championship game in the regionals, a step away from going to the Final Four. And we had a 5-point lead against the Cleveland Benedictine team that was just loaded with guys. They had Cameron Wright, who went to Pittsburgh. He was a Division I kid. We were not built that way. And most people did not give us a chance to win that game, but we were up 5 with less than a minute to go. And they'd missed a shot. And our big guy, who was really, really, really a tough kid. I mean, he wasn't one of the kids that a lot of people talked about on that team. Kid's name was Josh Brindley, but man, he was so important to us. And he got the rebound up 5, and he got bumped, so he probably got fouled, but the ball ended up on the floor and they scored. And so, now we're only up 3. And on the ensuing possession, we hadn't had a problem with the press all year long. I mean, hadn't had a problem with the press in 3 years. And we made a sloppy turnover, and they scored a bucket with 15 or 16 seconds left to cut it to 1. And I could see we were shaking, so I called a timeout, and we got into one of our press actions, right, which had been really good for us. And so we break the huddle and we go out there. And you got to understand, Benedictine was ridiculously athletic. The newspaper actually wrote that if they were playing pickup basketball, 8 Benedictine kids would be chosen before any of my guys would have been picked if you'd just done it by looking, right? So they were super athletic. And they're up in us, and we get to a 4 count, and I call my last timeout, right? Because we're not going to get it in. So we come back over, and, I draw, something back up. Again, it wasn't, anything overly tricky. It was just like, hey, listen, we got guys open. I mean, if you watch it, we just kind of froze. So we break the huddle again, and this time we got 2 guys open. We throw the ball to one, and I'm not going to say his name. It bounced off his hands and out of bounds. So now they've got the ball again, and on the inbounds pass, they run an inbound play, and we defend it really well, and we slap the ball out of their hands, and it bounces through 2 sets of legs right into Cameron Wright's hands, and he scores the game-winning basket. And it costs us a trip to Columbus, and it's just crazy. What sometimes will happen with kids in those situations. And I walked out of the gym. It was the weirdest thing, because I was like, what, like you just said, what just happened here? That had not happened to us. There was no reason for any of that to happen. And it was no one kid. It was just kind of a collective, kind of an inexplicable hiccup of a moment that, so what it did, Coach, to me tactically, and it did help me later in my career, is I sat with Mike Dunleavy Sr. and talked about this with him years later. And actually a year before it unplayed, just some things that you would do at the end of a game like that. And he just had some things he called get-me-ins. I mean, we just need to get the ball, and they were going to foul us, and we couldn't do it. So I sat with him, and I picked up a couple of these get-me-ins and designed one of my own. And we were in a similar situation at Milton almost 10 years later in 2016. We had a team making a run at us like that. And the get-me-ins got the ball in bounds, and it put us on the foul line, and it put us in the Final Four. So there was some learning with that, but man, I didn't want to learn that lesson, right? Not with those kids, right? So some of it you can't help, but having a special get-me-in or 2 that nobody's ever seen before, right? For that situation in that moment is something that I really hadn't thought of, but it was something that I feel like I let my team down on, and they felt like they let me down. So it was just a really weird moment. again, that's tournament basketball, right? It's March, and those are the things that happen. You go from that mountaintop to that valley, and it's all at once. And that's kind of what gets everybody excited about hoops this time of year.
Yeah, I always used a sideline out of bounds system where we would just have a play called G and a play called S. And S was when we were trying to score out of a sideline out of bounds, and G was when we just needed to get the ball in.
Yeah.
I don't know that I had a specific one for end line out of bounds, but we would also just kind of throw the ball in and then get right to a set as well.
Yep.
But I don't know that I had one for end line out of bounds. I'm very thankful that in my coaching career, in tournament games, I never had one of these. On either side, it seemed like when we won the game, we either won it decisively or just kind of kept teams at an arm's length and drowned the game away.
Yeah.
And when I lost, I lost 2 regional championship games and 1 state finals game. All of those were not situations where we had victory snatched from us. It was a situation where we were close, but we really couldn't get over the hump to really make it a challenging game. That probably helps you sleep at night rather than feeling like you were that close and had the victory in hand in some way, shape,
lots easier. Lots easier, man. I'll tell you what, I've had some games, and again, the March 10th game is one that I go into in great detail in my Rebuild 101, and it's kind of built around that. It was the greatest. It was honestly the greatest night of my coaching life, and a lot of it was because of the kids and the rebuilding process, and that there were no transfers or anything like that, and there were no big time guys. It was just a bunch of local kids that dug in and hung together, and got to that moment, and then we had that euphoric moment and it was a buzzer beater, right? And that's what made it great. I still watch it every year. I talk to these kids all the time still. I've been to their weddings and seen their kids grow, and they reach out to me, and we talk. It's funny. Every now and then somebody says, "Man, I watched that Benedictine game again, and how in the world did we lose that game? I mean, how in the world did we lose it?" But then you go back to the district championship game that we won, and we were down 8 points with 1:20 left and ended up winning in overtime. So, those things, some people will say they tend to even out over a career, but they don't feel like they even out, right? Yeah. They just don't feel like it. So but that's what makes March great. You know what I mean? We're in a great business. Basketball is such a great game. And, sometimes we coaches lose sleep and hair, over that. But it definitely entertains the masses here in March.
All right, Coach, let's dive into some post drills here. And the first one I wanted to throw up on the screen is a drill that I called warrior rebounding.
Huh?
I know a lot of coaches will call this the NBA drill, no babies allowed. But basically what we're looking at here is you put 3 players in the paint, and it's every man for himself. So they're jockeying for position, and they've got to get the rebound, try to stick it back in. So we're really working on leveraging position inside, where you're kind of knocking guys out of the way and creating angles for yourself to get a rebound. You're working on contested finishing, where you've got somebody breathing, right in your face, and you're trying to put the ball in. There's some physicality here. We're working on grabbing the ball with 2 hands and keeping the ball secured. But basically, we would play this game and have a line weighting of players. And when any individual player scored 3 buckets, they got to get out of the drill. And the other 2 players stayed in until they got 2 buckets. Yeah. So we didn't reset the scores. So like if number 52 had, 1 bucket when one of the other players got to 3, he would keep his score and a new player would come in, and they would stay in as long as they needed to get 3 buckets before they would rotate out. Give me some general thoughts here on this warrior rebounding or no babies allowed post-player development drill.
Yeah, we ran that drill exactly. We called it Iron Man, and it was run exactly the way that you're showing it there. There's the side thing here. It's also a really good conditioning drill, right? Because that ball stays live like that, and there's no breaks. There's no breaks. I'm not paying attention. Are they kicking the ball out to you after the basket goes in?
Yeah, each time the ball goes in, the coach will kind of shoot up another miss, and then they're playing live from there. So we would also
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, we would have the coach, anytime the play got too sloppy or the ball got too far away from the basket, we would have the
Yeah.
coach call for the ball, and the player would have to pass it to the coach, and he would fire
Yeah.
up another miss, because sometimes you get a long rebound, they're chasing it over by the door over there, and then it's turns into guards playing the game instead of our big men playing around the hoop. We don't want to watch our centers and power forwards trying to dribble to create a shot from way off the court. So that was just kind of one element we used to control it. But tell me how you guys did it.
We played it live through the net. I mean, the ball just stayed live, and the only time that it went to the coach was when it went outside the lane. It had to stay inside the key. So if the ball bounced outside the key, it was pitch it to the coach, and he would shoot it back up there. But we played it live through the net. It's similar. You know what I mean? I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to play it. I will tell you this: you find out who your tough kids are, and this is I would say this is also a great drill for the guards to get involved in. At baskets as well, because you want a hard-nosed team that goes in there and gets after loose balls and picks up the garbage and the trash and is able to throw it back in the basket. This is a really good drill to have going on at different baskets with your guards. When I was at Milton, we had Chris Lewis at 6'10", his brother Mo Lewis at 6'6", and he played at Navy. He was probably the best defensive player I've ever coached. Not probably, he definitely was. And Alex O'Connell, who played at Duke, had a brother. Alex was just a freshman that year, but his brother Sean O'Connell was a scholarship D1 kid to Georgia Southern, and those three in there together playing this game was worth the price of admission. Yeah. I mean, those guys went at it in there, and it was crazy because Mo was a senior and he was built kind of like an NBA or an NFL tight end or defensive end, and so he oftentimes, even though he was smaller than those two kids, he was a little bit stronger than them. Especially Chris was only a sophomore. Would actually often win this battle because it is a tough man. It is about being tough, and it's about having some footwork too. But it's about being tough above all other things, I think.
Yeah, toughness, footwork. I definitely agree there. Finishing with both hands. When you're catching the ball that close to the rim, you kind of don't have a choice to shoot it with the hand that gives you the most space. So you're working on that too. Balance, where you're constantly kind of getting nudged around and having to create solutions while you've got a guy leaning on you and pushing you out of the way. So this is definitely, how I would structure practices is we typically had a warm-up period, and then we would go into like a guard post breakdown skill development most commonly. And we would have maybe 6 to 10 total drills that the big men would go through, and we would kind of rotate them 3 at a time based on what we thought our big men needed. But they were all kind of, these kind of footwork, balance, finishing, strength type of drills like we're looking at now. Definitely. So you're working with a post player, coach. What's kind of the first thing you're wanting to get installed with a post player to make them sound to play in your system?
I mean, there's a couple things, right? I think you got to have great hands. So I mean, anything you can do to work on their hands is important. I think a lot of coaches out there would admit that one of the more frustrating things to in coaching is to have a big man who's got poor hands. And so that's one, and that's a tricky one, right? But the other thing obviously would be, their base, their balance, inside when they catch the ball, being on balance, and then, establishing a pivot foot and being able to, really what we try to do with ones that weren't developed at all. And with Chris Lewis in Georgia, he was a little different because he'd had quite a bit of training before he ever came to me. That's what happens with a kid like that. But with a kid like Nick Smith at Fairless, he came with almost no training. He was a freshman when I got the job there. So he was coming up from the middle school program, and those coaches had obviously worked with him in some capacity, but he hadn't been coached as a varsity player. So really just starting with a couple of moves, right, that he could make when he catches the ball in the post, giving him a couple things to empower him to kind of get his post game started, right? A basic drop step, would be one that we would teach. We would teach that, obviously to drop step to the baseline, you can counter with a baby hook, over that inside shoulder. And then an up and under move is something that we would always teach, especially a kid who's not super big. The more that they could do those 3 things, it really allowed them to build an offensive game to kind of get started, and we would go from there. And I would credit Henry Cobb for kind of, any ability that I had to develop an undeveloped post player, because he was really good at those things.
Yeah.
And what he showed me when I was an assistant coach, is that you don't get overly complex with these kids right away. Give them one, give them two, give them three moves, right, and teach that to mastery. And then, as they show you they've mastered it, then you can start to build some other things. But those would be the things that I would start with.
Yeah, when I was a young coach, I got my first head coaching job when I was 26 years old. And to say that I had issues delegating responsibilities at that point in my coaching career would be a major understatement. But I did hand off post-play training to Coach John Dempsey. And Coach Dempsey really built some trust with me that I could hand things off to my coaching staff and they would be treated with care and respect and do a better job than even I could do. Coach Dempsey was not a coach that was a master at teaching post-development when he got this assignment, but he took it very seriously. And I thought that our post players got very quality work under his leadership. And I think that was part of the process of helping me understand that I didn't have to do every single thing as the head coach. I could really allow my assistant coaches to work. And I got a lot better at that as my coaching career went on. But when I was a young guy, I didn't want to hand anything off. I was thinking I can do this stuff better than anybody. I want to do it myself. And as I matured in my coaching career, I started handing more and more things off, and baseline out of bounds packages and guard development and all kinds of stuff. And I felt like that was really freeing for me to be able to look at bigger picture stuff instead of being so in the weeds with practices and all the things that are going on. But let's get into this one-on-one finishing drill. I call this block finishing. And what we're looking at here is a kind of a framework for a drill that's pretty adjustable in different ways. But you start two guys on the blocks, coach passing from the three-point line or the foul line. And basically whoever receives the pass becomes the offensive player. And whoever doesn't receive the pass becomes the defensive player. So the interesting thing about this is you're really working on being able to catch the ball and get the ball up quickly. But you're also working on a defensive side of things where you're working on contesting without fouling. And what I like the most is we would run this on the blocks like what you see here. We would also run this from the short corner, so it made for a little bit different footwork as you're going up to finish. But we would also run the offensive players from the elbows, where the coach would be kind of throwing a lead pass from where he is now, and they would be doing kind of like a one-step layup with a challenge coming from the other elbow. I always felt this was really good for teaching players just how to collect the ball and go up quick, and also from a defensive standpoint, trying to get as good a contest as you can without fouling. What's your take on this block finishing drill, Coach?
Yeah, we ran something very similar to that as well. And I think that you've got both elements in this too, right? You've got the hands thing going on here. You got to be able to catch it clean to be able to get that finish. And again, the thing that I like about this, Matt, and I always stress this as often as I can to any coaches that I consult with, and I've been blessed to meet a number of them around the country. Simplicity, right, is really, really important when you're coaching high school kids, or probably any kid. Look how simple this drill is, right? I mean, this is not the kind of thing that, someone's going to see on X and go, oh, wow, look at this fancy training. It's just really raw, very rudimentary, simple basketball. But look at the value that you're getting out of this. You're teaching big guys to catch and finish. You're teaching them to be strong in there. They're getting multiple reps. It's just really good stuff, and you hit the nail on the head too with the whole thing and delegating, responsibility to others. I had some good assistants over there. I had some great ones. At Fairless, as we built our staff during our rebuilding process, I kind of fell into a local guy who was living in the Fairless district named Mike Husted. His son, you might remember, Jeff Husted, who played at Perry. Went to Gannon, was a Division III All-American big man, and Mike was a big guy. And so we'd get Jeff sometimes in the gym with our kids too to work with our bigs. And, Mike did a great job working with our big guys at Fairless with things just like this. We were a very guard-oriented team there. and our big guys were not very big. So a drill like this was invaluable for us because, what it taught them to do was to make easy baskets, right? Catch the ball and make easy baskets. And when your guards are giving you, the kind of points that ours were giving us, if you could squeeze 8 to 12 out of that 5 position, your score just went from 68 to 80, and it's very important. So I love this drill. I love the simplicity of it. I love the energy in it. There's nothing not to like about this. These are the kind of things that you absolutely need to be doing with your big guys.
Yeah, I like the footwork element, particularly we're looking at them executing out of the short corner right now, where we would be teaching these players to kind of creep in from the baseline and catch the ball while they make a front pivot and then use a power dribble to go up strong. And this isn't team practice. This is kind of a skill development session as opposed to a team practice. But in a team practice, we would be working a lot more on the technique of being able to catch the ball, front pivot to get your shoulders square to the baseline, use a power dribble, use a shot fake if needed. But I like the different starting points that you can use with this drill. And then one of the interesting things is with your coach as a passer, you can kind of work with them on catching with your players, where you can throw some passes behind them. You can give them some tough passes to catch where they really have to concentrate. You can kind of loop it up in the air where they have to concentrate on seeing where the ball is while a defender is closing in on them. A lot of these passes here, like what we're looking at on the screen, are just kind of direct passes. But what you can do is you can really manipulate that pass to make it fast or slower or off target, and then players have to make adjustments accordingly. Any final thoughts on block finishing, Coach, before we move on?
No, man, that's great stuff. Like I said before, I would say that you can work on those in individuals. That's an easy thing to also put into your pre-practice if you've got your perimeter guys working on their shooting. That's an easy breakdown drill if you've got a set of posts to put a coach at a basket with them during the pre-practice stuff, and get some reps in with that even during a regular season practice. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, when you're working with post-player skill development, how early do you think it's appropriate to start working with kids on playing the post? Do you think the youth levels, the middle school levels, the high school levels? There's thoughts out there about not pigeonholing kids into a post role, trying to get them at guard skills when they're younger. Oftentimes when kids are little, there's not a lot of size difference between some of the kids, so you can't really identify who exactly are going to be post players later on. What's your thoughts on the appropriate timing of starting to work on post specific things with your players?
I mean, I think that's a great question. I think when you're running youth camps and things like that, I think what I kind of evolved into over the years was teaching everybody that stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not overcomplicating it, like not teaching it necessarily like you're a post player, but here's what you do. If you get yourself down on the block and you decide you want to post up. Yeah. But when, and I've had some kids that could do that over the year. We did not have that kind of kid at Fairless. But obviously when I was in Georgia, Alex O'Connell was a 6'7" guard. So, to not give him some of those same skills and work with him on some of those same skills would have been doing him a great disservice, because a 6'7" guard, especially in a high school game, is going to find some matchups. If you can get him down there and he's got some things he likes to do, that's another way for him to score, right? So I think that's a great question. I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think that, teaching some of the basic footwork and some of the basic concepts to every kid in the program when you're running a comprehensive system is a good idea, because you really don't know who's going to grow. I mean, there's been a lot of kids over the years that I've seen that were their big kid, right, in 5th grade, 6th grade feeder, and by the time they were 8th graders, they couldn't do anything because they'd been taught to be a big kid and they weren't big anymore. And so you got to be careful. I think you got to be careful with that.
Yeah, I've had a lot of success with this bear offense through the years. And one of the features of this bear offense, it's kind of a flex variation where you're coming off a low back screen, and then you can settle into the post. And a lot of the success that I had with bear offense was, since it was a continuity offense and different players would rotate through that spot where they would come off the back screen and be able to settle into the post. When we had optionality in terms of who we could throw the ball to in the post, and we could
Yep.
isolate mismatches. We could take advantage of a switch on that back screen.
Sure. Yep.
But where it was a situation where it wasn't just like our 5 is our only player that posts up, or our
Right.
big men are the only player that posts up. Anybody could play down there. When we had teams that had 4 or 5 guys that were comfortable and confident to be able to catch the ball with their back to the basket on the block, that offense was kind of devastating. And that really only happens if you teach post skills, to your whole team instead of just your post guys. But Coach, let's dive into 2-on-2 high-low here. So now we're starting to develop some synergy and chemistry with post players working with one another. Yep. So really all we have is a 2-on-2 situation, offense and defense. We have a coach passing, and we work some different situations where you might start with a cross screen, or one player might just flash to the high post and the other player ducks in. But we're really working on trying to enter the ball to either the low or the high post and then play from there, where a post player could catch it in the low post and they would have to kind of read a cutter or read spacing before they made a move. And then from the high post, we really want to work on this synergy between our 2 big men, where we're looking to be able to duck in and throw passes to the inside of the defense. The high-low pass can definitely be a devastating feature of an offense, but it doesn't really come naturally. You've really got to work and rep the pass from big to big and develop some chemistry. And that's what we would try to do with something like this, where we're working on catching the ball on 2 feet, being able to pivot to face the basket, sealing for position, throwing to a target hand, being able to drive the ball down the lane if there was an open lane or an overplay on the ball. But this was kind of a drill. We were really looking for chemistry between our 2 bigs, trying to work together in a tandem.
Yeah, I mean, this is a drill that if you're playing 2 post players and you're not doing stuff like this, then you're missing the boat, right? Because those are not easy passes to make when they're not drilled. You keep using the word chemistry, and I think it's the perfect word, right? Once kids start getting used to playing together in those situations, the trust starts to build, and okay, well, that guy doesn't look like he's open, but I know if I make this pass, he'll catch it. And then the guy who's posting kind of gets a feel for how the pass is going to come, and pretty soon you're a really good interior passing team, and that is a weapon if you're playing 2 posts. 100%. I take a look at a team right now like Florida and how much better they've gotten over the course of the season. At the beginning of the year, they struggled because their personnel changed. It was still good, but last year they were very guard heavy. They got a couple guys go to the NBA. Right, this year they're very big heavy. Their guards have played better lately, but when they once they learned to play through those posts and realized that's where the money was, you see in this kind of stuff, they're unguardable right now. They're a pretty good example of seeing that right now. Something else I see here too, and again, this is kind of a side thing. The coaching here that you're doing is really expert. You've got this stuff going on the side, and for any young coach watching, look, there's action going on here in the middle, and it looks like you're probably the one leading the one at the main basket here, if I'm not mistaken. You're maybe working with the perimeter players.
Yeah.
And the post guys are working off to the side. I mean, I always like to say, you can kind of tell how good a team's going to be by watching them practice and how busy their practice floor is. That's a really busy, industrious, focused practice floor. So you got some great things going on there.
Yeah, I think in coaching, there's going to be times where you have to kind of just put everybody on the baseline, and you have to explain things, and you have to work on things as one group. But as often as you can, to keep things going on separate baskets, to have kids be involved, I think it goes a long way. Certainly nowadays with attention spans that are getting shorter and shorter. Yeah. So there's a time and a place to have everybody on the baseline and just talk to your team as one group. But there's a lot of times you got to be really conscious about how efficient you are in using the resources that you have. How many baskets, how many balls, keep kids busy, keep kids doing things. But yeah. What would be a sign to you, Coach, that a post player has been well-trained? So when I think of something like this, I would be thinking of, if I watched a post player and they were working a front side seal, and then the ball reversed to the top, and they immediately made a pivot to create an angle to receive the
Yeah.
ball from the top. That's like something like, okay, these guys are trained up on how to execute. Is there any kind of those little fundamentals that really tell you a post player has been trained up?
I mean, that's a really good one. The one you gave, you stole probably the first one that I would have done, because it is a lot about angles in there, right? And it's one thing to run a one-on-one drill or a one-on-zero where the guy flashes, calls for the ball, catches it, drops, steps, and scores. It's another thing completely for a guy to be guarded down there by a really good defender and know how to leverage that defense to get himself open. So, yeah, that feeling there, half reverses, sealing, ducking in, pinning a guy deep, knowing when to do it. That would be one. I think another one, and again, one of the things that we stress is being a good passer, I think shows out of the post, shows that a kid has been trained, not to be a black hole is something that, there's a fine line there, right? And Chris Lewis, I keep going back to him, was a great example, because he was, besides being the best big man I've ever coached, probably the smartest human being I've ever met, right? I mean, the dude was running Facebook, Instagram, and then before Oculus hired him away. And I mean, the things he did, dude was just smart. So part of it is that. But the other thing about Chris was he was extremely unselfish, and so his unselfishness with his super smart, brain made him a really good passer. So he knew, right? Okay, it's time to go and score here. But he also was really good at feeling a double team and knowing where to pass the ball when the double team came. So all those things I think go into training a big guy, right? Because if you throw the ball in there and something good only happens 1 out of every 3 or 4 times, then it doesn't make much sense to keep throwing it in there. So having that training and knowing when to pass and being a good passer to go along with being a good finisher, I think those are some of the things that I would say, kind of generally speaking, those would be the big ones for me.
Yeah, some of the things that I think about would be understanding when to flash and how to absorb space. So like if a guard drives in and a big steps up, how does a player kind of take that space and still be available? I think that's a good one. A lot of post players flash at random or wrong times, but the smart players are like looking for the head turn of their defender and then flashing at an appropriate time. I also think about like rebounding, while you get the ball chinned and pivoted so that you can make an outlet on balance. I think a lot of that doesn't come naturally to kids unless you train them. But once they learn something like that, it's a skill that really keeps the ball secured and also can really start your transition offense where you've got a vacuum in there that can suck the ball up. It's safe once he gets it, and he can advance it up the court because he can pivot on balance, look up the court, and throw an outlet pass without being too risky. But that you don't have to just like your point guard doesn't have to come back and get the ball. He can throw a pass that's 15, 20 feet up the court off of a strong base like that. So, Coach, I think we've had enough of the this kind of high-low finishing series here. I'd like to get back into some other drills to look at. And while I queue up that media, I wanted to ask you, what are some important how important is teaching post players to play without the ball? Like we think of basketball as kind of the guards dominate handling the ball. So how are we really emphasizing post players being able to seal, being able to duck in, and how they position? So we want to kind of teach post players, how to survive without the ball. Tell me about some keys there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole key to the thing. I mean, it's the key to the entire operation, I believe, because they don't play with the ball a lot. I mean, they're not point guards and they're not wings, right? And whether we want to like that or not, I mean, the fact of the matter is they've got to do their work without the ball if they're ever going to get the ball. So I think like a lot of drill work that matches up with whatever offense you're running is important, so that they kind of get the vibe of what they'll be doing during games, and breakdown. At Fairless, we used a lot of high post stuff. We used a lot of chin action. So setting a good screen, we would teach our 5 would often be a great way for them to get a touch. in the high post on that little flare screen that we would run out of our chin action, right? If you set the good screen and then present yourself to the basketball, a lot of times, especially if that guard coming off your little flare screen is a really good shooter, you're going to get the defense to react with two, and you're going to end up with a really good chance to get a touch at the elbow there, right? And then obviously drilling what you do when you get the ball at the elbow, once you catch it. If you're playing more of a low post stuff, then obviously it's going to be important to know, am I supposed to be set up on the ball side block here? Am I better off opposite the ball in kind of that dunker position that you see in dribble drive? And if you're not drilling that stuff daily to go along with all the kind of the work that you do with the ball, then your post guy's probably not going to have a great feel for being a part of the offense. So I think obviously the part with playing without the ball is everything, and then you get into the a lot sometimes when I was in Georgia, we used the Euro ball screen action quite a bit.
Yeah.
So again, now you're talking about setting ball screens. You don't have the ball where you're setting that ball screen, right? Where are you going to set the screen? What are you going to do? You're going to roll short. You're going to roll hard to the basket. Are you a pick and pop guy? And I think it's really important to make sure that you're training these guys to play without the ball in drill work that simulates the movements that they're going to be making connected to your offense. That'd be the way that I would answer that.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, I'd like to look at a kind of a non-traditional post player drill, and this is one that I loved running in my coaching career. I called this one-on-one guard, and this is kind of the basis of being able to protect the rim and take charges. And basically what we're doing is we're going to start a player underneath the rim or outside of the rim area, and we're going to have a player kind of catch the ball attacking downhill. And what we're really working on here is trying to keep our chest square to the ball, moving our feet to meet the ball side to side, keeping our hands off the ball. We're thinking that if a player is attacking downhill and we're reaching out with our hands to stop them, that's a foul. So we really want to have no hands on the ball. We want to meet them with the chest. So we want to wall up, and we want to keep the ball in front of us to be able to contest without fouling. So the big goal with this drill is to try to make the shot a shot where the defender is between the ball and the basket when the shot goes up. So we don't want to give up an alley where the ball gets by and they have a clean shot at the rim without a defender in between. So what we're really trying to do is create these kind of micro advantages where this kind of one-on-one downhill is kind of a disadvantage type of situation. We want to turn it into kind of a neutral shot attempt where we make the offense earn their points. So we're not going to foul them, and we're going to keep them in front of us where they're having to make a shot over a contest instead of with a clear rim. Have you used something like this before, Coach?
Absolutely. We used almost something exactly like this. We had a little added thing to it that we used. I will say this. We used to watch Chris Lewis do this in this drill, and he was such a great shot blocker. Again, smart is such a nice thing to add to a big guy, and he was a genius. A lot of guys would see him standing there and they would veer their dribble off and wait for help. He was a fantastic shot blocker. I mean, just a really, really good one. He had great timing. He was very smart. He was good at staying vertical. And he was really good at this drill, right? Obviously, especially when the player was significantly smaller than him. But one of the things that we would also do out of this drill is we would add an outlet pass to it. You talked about the outlet pass, and we would have just a coach standing over here on the wing, and he would move around and call for the ball. And so the extra thing would be to, whether the ball went in the basket or not, play it like it's a miss. Grab the ball, get a good strong base, make a pivot, make a good outlet pass, and jog to the end of the line. So again, the simplicity of this drill is really the beauty of it. And again, I keep saying that young coaches, there's not a lot of glamour and sexy in some of this stuff, right? It's just really, really important that you teach it. And so I really like the drill. It's one that we've used. And, again, the added thing with the outlet pass was something that we worked on, because I think that, again, like you said, that's part of training a big guy. And it's really a lot easier to run a fast break if your big guy can catch the ball and pass it up the floor, and your guard doesn't have to run back and take it out of his hands.
Yeah, and I really like this drill as a foundational piece for taking charges. So the players aren't taking charges in this drill, but what they are understanding is how to keep their chest in front of the ball. And then they can recognize when they get that contact straight into their chest, that's an opportunity for them to fall down and take the charge. But without that, you're really hoping and praying that they understand how to take that contact and when to take that contact. But if you're really training them on keeping your shoulders square to the ball, sliding laterally, absorbing contact into their chest with their hands off, then they have that foundation to be able to take charges when the time calls for it.
Sure.
The other thing with this drill is, it's good from an offensive standpoint where you're forcing the kids to attack downhill to find a solution where they don't really have a second option. They might have a change of direction, but they can get creative with using Euro steps and veering away and trying to finish with contact. So I think there's some skill development here from the offensive standpoint where they're trying to make it as challenging for the defense to keep their chest in front. And they're having to find some new solutions where they might be more comfortable on a fast break or becoming a more creative offensive player. Any final thoughts on one-on-one guard before we shift into the next one, Coach?
No, I love the idea too of reminding everybody that there's two sides to every drill, right? I mean, there's a chance I'm always thinking on the offensive side, especially if I'm a player, right? It's a defensive drill, but I've got the ball. So, right, I want to do something to make myself a better basketball player. And I think that you got a chance there to refine your skills in that one-on-one open court situation. So a great point there.
Okay, so we're going to move into a drill I call the burger drill. And this is named after a player that I coached, Will Berger, who ended up having a very, very good career where he got awards, but we really needed to train him on some fundamentals. And this is one of the drills that we created to specifically do that. This was an innovation from my dad where he's talking about, well, why don't you just have him do something like this? And he kind of mapped this out for me. And we used this drill as really a way to establish going up and getting the ball at its highest point, and then establishing some footwork and some balance after that. So all we're having the kids do is kind of bring the ball up to the basket, throw it off the glass. We want them to go try to grab the ball with two hands at its highest point, and then we would kind of prescribe a different finish for them so that they had to come down with the ball, and then they had to keep their balance and execute footwork. So what we were finding is guys were grabbing the ball and they would come down off balance, and they're slopping some stuff up at the rim while the defense is putting some pressure on them. So we wanted them to really have balance when they come down and be able to use their footwork to help them create a shot. So they're grabbing the ball at the highest point, they're coming down with it, and then, we're talking to them, we want you to fake, and then we want you to spin, or we want you to drop step, or we want you to whatever. So they're kind of having to think through the process on a step-by-step basis where they have to do one thing and then the next thing. And what we're really trying to work here is a balance in footwork. The downside of a drill like this is kind of dry technique work where there's no buddy to go against specifically. But I think you have to start teaching in that capacity before a player can understand how to execute a drill with somebody leaning on them. They've got to understand the footwork within the technique, and you would learn it in something like this. Any thoughts here, Coach?
Absolutely. This is a John Beeline drill. When he was at West Virginia, not exactly the way you're doing it. Your dad's little innovation there with the cones is ingenious. Isn't it great having a dad who was a coach? They see things sometimes that, that this new era of coach makes very complicated and says, why don't you just try this? Right. Yeah. And so often they're, I had a dad who was a head coach at Archbishop Hoban, and your dad was the head coach for all those years. And so often they're so right. You know what I mean? But this is a great drill. Coach Beeline called this your step across opposites here. Yeah. And he drilled it ad nauseum with his players. He had a kid, if you remember, named Kevin Pittsnoggle back in the day when he was there making that run to, I think they were an Elite Eight team that year. And Mike Gansey, who's now, in the front office with the Cavaliers, and Coach Beeline's son, Patrick, they were doing some demonstrations for us at the camp team camp that I took one of my teams to. And this was one of the things that Pittsnoggle was demonstrating. And look at, you said dry, but I say important, right? Yeah. Again, you talk about attention spans in this day and age and all the things that catch the attention and get all the likes on Twitter and, social media and stuff. This probably isn't one of them, but like, watch basketball today, college basketball, and see how many times a player does this, grabs the ball on one side and makes that little step across move and finishes with nobody to defend him on the other. I mean, it's something that you have to drill. with no defense before you're going to get a kid to do it with a defender on him. So it's, again, simple yet super important. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I would credit my dad with this drill creation. He also gave me a drill that he called the wood chopper drill. And basically, a player would take the ball and they would throw it off the backboard. They had a matchup that they were paired against that was behind them. So they had to throw the ball off the backboard, and then they had to hold their defender off and then go get the ball at its highest point. And after that, the player they were paired with would ball pressure them. And while they were getting ball pressured, they had to pivot and find an outlet pass. And, I remember him showing me this drill and thinking, well, do they get to shoot it? What's going on here? And he's like, nope, they just have to hold box out position, go get the ball, come down with it strong, pivot, and make a good outlet pass. And we would run that drill for like 2 minutes at a time. And I thought that it made the biggest difference in our outlet passing, where kids were confident and strong, grabbing the ball, pivoting up the court, and firing a 15 to 20-foot outlet pass on the money. And it came with like no practice time. All we would spend is 2 minutes here and there working on it, and it made a big difference for us.
Yep. No, definitely. And then, it's a language too, right? Now, if a kid in live action gets the ball knocked out of his hand, you just reference the wood chopper drill, right? Hey, listen, That's what we do the wood chopper drill for. And then, kids make connections to stuff like that. And, once again, now we're talking about what you really use 5 men for, right? Get rebounds and throw them to guards. So that's a great drill.
Coach,
sorry, Chris Lewis. Sorry.
We're heading towards the end of the big men drills I had planned for the day. And what I've got here is a drill we called the post pit. So the post pit would be a one-on-one drill with some coaches passing on the perimeter. And what we can do is we work the ball around the perimeter. We might have 2 passers or we might have 3 passers, but we've got 2 players on the inside. And when we talked a little bit earlier about a player's ceiling for position on one side of the lane, and then the ball gets reversed and they make that kind of half spin, this would be a great drill to work on something like that. But really, we're working on ceiling, we're working on footwork, we're working on calling for the ball, we're working on showing a target where we want the ball, we're working on our footwork once we catch it. With a third passer at the top, we can really work on the high-low passing angle here. And underrated feature of this drill is the conditioning element. It's really tiring to work across the lane, work for positioning, go one-on-one and battle with another post player. And if you get stuck in the post pit, you're going to be dog tired. Basically, what we would do is once you scored in the pit, you got to go out, but you had to stay in the pit until you scored a basket. So some of these, and I think we might even see one on this video, where we get some extended stretches of guys getting stuck in the pit, and you can just see the physical fatigue setting in. So it's a great conditioner, as well as a lot of the little parts of playing the post with the positioning and leverage and sealing and ducking in and things of that nature. Any thoughts here on the post pit?
Yeah, I like it. It's something that we've definitely done. I think there's an opportunity there to add another passer at the point, to continue with that concept of leverage as well. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a great drill for all those skills: catching, pivoting, being strong with the ball, finishing through contact. Post defense there is something that you could have another coach there stressing the defensive side of that and make it really competitive. And then again, you hit the nail on the head with conditioning, right? We're sitting here watching it on TV, and it's like, all right, that looks easy, right? Try that sometime for about 30 seconds and see how easy that is. That's a hard drill, man. That's a conditioner right there.
Yeah, it can definitely get sloppy if you're not, coaching it up. So you don't want that to happen. But you can see right now, just watching on film, the blonde kid is trying to get out of the drill, even though he didn't score. So he's finally out now. So I think the conditioning element's very underrated, but you can work on these kind of deep seals. And number 4, who has the ball now, he was a guard for us, but he was about 6'2". So we would try to use him on some post mismatches. So we would try to train him up every now and then with our post players, where he was getting some reps with his back to the basket and also playing some post defense. So what do you
Sure.
think in terms of having your coaches as passers or players as passers in this? Do you think there's value in putting your players as the passers where they're working on maybe throwing
Yeah.
some of these passes in, and maybe even making it a contested pass where you've
Yeah.
got an offense and a defense on the perimeter? So
Yeah.
you might have to find more realistic passing angles into the post.
I think it's a gradual buildup, Matt. I think it's both, right? I mean, I think when you're working specifically on certain things with post players, that it's good to have coaches making those entries so that the post knows that he's going to get the ball and he's going to be able to execute his move. I think once you've gone through that part of it, or that part of the practice, and maybe at the other end of the floor, your guards are working on making passes to the post, pass fakes and bounce passes, passes up to a high hand. And they're working at that at the other end uncontested. Then you come down and you put them together. And I think there's an opportunity to play 2-on-2 there on both sides, maybe with a coach that's dead and unguarded there at the point, and reversing the ball from side to side to guarded wing players who are making that pass. So I think that you can break it apart, and I think you can put it back together and turn it into a live thing that's either 2-on-2 on one side, or really 4-on-4 with a wing and a post on both sides of the floor, and a coach passing in the middle to get the ball reversed. And, if you go that route, you could even get some cross screening involved there with two post players and maybe some high-low action if you want to really put all the pieces together. So again, I think it's all about what you're trying to accomplish at a given time in the practice.
Yeah, so what we've looked at here today in these drills are all stuff that I would use in like a guard post breakdown with our post players. And this would be, again, a 15-minute block where we're probably hitting 3 of these drills in a 15-minute block, maybe 4 even on some days. But basically, we're getting quick reps, trying to work on all these little nuances of post defense. I think there is some validity in terms of working guards into some of these drills that we've seen here today. But I really like this approach from just quick hits. We're talking about 3-4 minute segments into a drill and then into the next one that are all kind of focused on this interior play. Talk to me a little bit about your philosophy in terms of skill development in season. Obviously, when you're in season, you've got to work on your team approach. How does your team play defense? How does your team play transition? How does your team play half-court offense? You still want to do some skill development. I've primarily focused a lot of off-season training on skill development. And then once we were in season, I felt like it was kind of a luxury to be able to get to it. But for the most part, we spent most of our practices working on our team elements during practice. What are you thinking in terms of balancing skill work versus team development while you're in season?
I mean, the longer I went with it, the more committed I was to our pre-practice lock-in shooting routine that led us into a segment of skill development every single day. Now, as the season goes on and practices become shorter, that clock on that pre-practice time definitely became a little bit shorter because you don't want the longer practices later in the year. But like our guys knew that, the clock was going to be ticking as they were getting dressed for practice, and they needed to get on the floor with their partner to get their shots up. And then what would happen is let's say, practice starts at 3:00 and you get out at 2:30. So the clock would start ticking at 2:35, and it would show you when the pre-practice session was going to be over. So we'd start the clock at maybe 45 minutes. So the sooner you get down there, the more shots you can get because you knew that live practice was going to start at 3:15. At some point, in the pre-practice lock-in shooting, the coaches would hit the floor, and as the season would wear on, assistant coaches would take personnel groups and go to baskets and work on some of these drills, Matt. And we would try to sprinkle the things in that we knew were a major part of our skill development and the work that the kids need to be able to do in live action every single day of practice from the first one to the end of the year. The time would fluctuate. According to the time of the year and how much time we were going to practice in a given day, but there was something every day. And I got better at that as my career went on, because what I found is that at the end of the year, if you've got a really good team, the execution, is going to continue to stay tight during your practices, but you want them to stay tight with their basics. And so making sure that was emphasized in every practice, that we're just never going to go away from that. I think was important for some of my better teams. And when that became a part of our culture, that you knew that was going to be part of your day every day was that skill work. Kids would police themselves in it, and it became a really lively part of practice that the kids embraced, and they took ownership of developing their skills in it. And so it wasn't a lot of pulling teeth and and motivating. Kids got after it. But like again, that takes time to develop that culture. So that's the way I would answer that question. You're not going to obviously take up 45 minutes of practice time with it during the season, but I think it's important to make it be something that you're working on daily.
Yeah, I really like those kind of 15-minute hits where you can jam a lot into 15 minutes. You've got your guards working on one thing and your posts working on other things. So you've got your players separated. You've got a really efficient gym where there's a lot going on at one time, and you're feeling like you're nurturing those skills along with your team development.
Sure.
So, Coach, I've got one-on-one slam queued up here. This is another drill that we've used for post-player development. And the concept here is you've got an offense and a defense, and the defense gets to slam the ball down anywhere they want in the paint. And then the offensive player can come and address the ball. They can pick it up how they'd like to pick it up. But you're basically playing one-on-one, no dribble from there. So in this kind of skill session that we're looking at, they're getting a little bit further away from the basket than what I would like. But honestly, what we're looking at here is teaching players how to create space through their pivoting to get their shot off. And, your defense is working on kind of contesting without fouling. So this session is probably they're settling for too many fadeaways. But again, this isn't a team practice here. This is like an off-season skill development. Things are, a little bit looser structured here. But we're really working on being able to use a pivot to create a shot for yourself on the inside. So is this a drill that you had used in your coaching career or something like this?
I never have, Coach. I don't hate that. I'd like to see the ball closer to the basket, like you said.
Yeah.
I have not had many kids, I would say maybe 3 in my career that could consistently do something with that one leg fall away.
Yeah.
That's not something I would necessarily like. That shot that was just taken, I'm not sure I'd be encouraging that shot. But no, as far as the footwork thing goes, forget the shot. They're working on pivoting there without traveling. They're working on creating space. I think there's some value in what I see there, definitely. Again, maybe move that ball down inside of 8 feet, right? That would be my thing.
And what we're looking at here is these aren't even post players that are executing this drill. It looks like guards are running a big man drill because that's what it is. But this gentleman played at Mount Union Division III college basketball. This is Daryl Strotter. He played Walsh. He's Walsh's all-time leading scorer. This Alfonso played at Walsh, so that's Division II college basketball. And then this is a high school player. So we're not looking at classically trained post players. We're looking at guards kind of executing a big men drill. So that's why it kind of looks like we're settling for a lot of more of these fadeaways than I think you would want to see from a coach. But I think this drill is great for developing footwork, learning how to keep the ball protected. You see how they're picking up the ball and they're keeping their body between the ball and the defense. I think that goes a long way in teaching post players how to keep that ball protected around the basket. But you're not going to see a lot at the high school level specifically. A lot of guys busting out Akeem Olajuwon, dream shake type of post moves. But I think this can start kind of the creative process where they can understand how to use their footwork and leverage their footwork and to be able to create solutions for themselves around the rim where they're not getting blocked and they're able to be fouled. You're not really able to be fouled if you're shooting all the fadeaways that these guys are shooting. But it looks like I might have gotten on them a little bit here about getting the ball closer to the rim and attacking the basket a little bit stronger because these reps here lately have looked a lot different than the ones
better
at the beginning.
Yeah. And again, you're watching a drill, so I didn't mean to critique it. Just from a coaching standpoint, and you can't hear what they're saying. So I'm sure when the kid was taking that shot right there, someone's telling him that's soft, right? I mean, we're looking for something a little tougher than that. And so there's some coaching going on. You can see a couple of these guys are really good players. Like this guy with the ball here, he knows what he's doing, right? And
Yeah,
that was not his best rep, but he's made a couple of really, really powerful, really good basketball plays from that position. I think it's a hard drill. It's definitely a difficult drill, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and I think this is one where you could, if you had three baskets, you could have post players kind of battling at three different baskets, doing this kind of thing. Maybe even make it something fun where the winners of each basket, combine into a basket or something like
Yeah.
that. But I think this is kind of a fun way to get competitive, play inside with some contact, and I think learn some key footwork techniques along the way. You got time for one more, or you need to get out of here, Coach?
I'm like, where do I got to be? When's the basketball game start? Right, you got Carolina Duke tonight. You got Florida Kentucky. If it hasn't started yet, then I still got time.
All right, so let me I'll queue up one more of these if I can get one loaded up here.
And how about that game last night, Miami of Ohio and Ohio U? That was a beautiful game. That was a classic game.
Yeah, I kind of like Ohio kind of being the center of the basketball talk around here.
Pretty neat thing, man. That tell you what, that Miami of Ohio team, they're very skilled. They are very connected. And there's something to be said for being battle tested too. I mean, they're not going to be afraid of the moment because they've been in the moment a lot. It's an interesting group. I don't know that they can go nose to nose with the Floridas and Michigans of the world, but they're going to be a tough out for those first two rounds. I can see them in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I didn't realize how rare it was for a team to go undefeated through regular season in college basketball. It seems like, I guess, that it's only happened maybe 5 times in the last 25 or 30 years.
Hasn't been very often.
Yeah, that seems a little bit more rare than what I would think with all the different teams that have played. Is there a moment, Coach, that you remember a post player in your coaching career really figuring it out, whether it was like a situation in practice or a situation in a game? Is there a specific moment when you could feel like a light bulb came on for a specific kid?
Absolutely. Nick Smith, I've used his name at Fairless, and I still talk to Smitty sometimes. He's a great kid, just a hard-working, salt-of-the-earth type of kid. Very intense, played hard all the time. Once his footwork came together, his hands were naturally really good. And he was only 6'3.5", maybe 6'4". But man, he was strong, good shoulders, great base. Just a country strong kid, worked hard to hone his skills. And his junior year, we had a guard named Jerry Prestier that was kind of the centerpiece of our teams. Jerry's one of the really great shooters in the history of Ohio basketball, not just Northeast Ohio. He was in the top 3 all-time 3-point shooters when he graduated back in 2002. That was Nick's junior year. It was really that year that it kind of all came together for him. He started to do all the things that good post players do, and really complimented Jerry well. And it was really, just a lot of the things that we've seen here in drill work, right? Catching, making a good post move, finishing, making free throws, being a glass cleaner, good outlet passes, good passer out of the post.
Yeah.
And when you put that with good perimeter play, you become a really good team. And we were a top 10 of the state team that year. At one point, won 18 games. The district was loaded that year. We didn't get out of the district, but it was a great season for us, conference championship season. And then following year, Nick was a conference player of the year candidate. He didn't win it, but it was a top 3 vote getter in that. So it's really a gratifying thing to see. Chris Lewis was an obvious one. You knew where he was going, right? He was the player of the year in our region in Georgia his senior year. And then he went to Harvard and he played 4 years for Tommy Amaker. He was Harvard's MVP 2 years there, 2 of the 4 years he stayed there. And, unfortunately for Chris, the year that they were headed to the NCAAs, COVID hit and wiped the NCAAs out. So that was the way his career finished. But, watching the develop of Nick, and then obviously the expected development of Chris Lewis were 2 really gratifying post experiences that I've had in my career.
Yeah, I've got a final one for us to look at, and this is a drill I called PPS, post position and score. And this is a guided drill, so the defense isn't live, but we're working with our post players on kind of walking their man in to establish kind of a connection with the physicality element of this. using like a leg whip to seal around. And
Yep.
then we're getting into kind of a prescribed footwork technique from here. So we're asking the defense to put a body on them and give a lighthearted contest. But really for the offense, really we're working on establishing a physical presence, using footwork to present themselves to receive a pass, and then executing some footwork on the catch. And all of the footwork we would use is typically a no dribble type of footwork where players are starting to understand they can just use a simple pivot to shoot at the basket. I think a lot of players think that post play needs to be complicated, but particularly if you're just like taller than the person that's guarding you, you can just turn around and shoot the ball over top of them without doing too much fancy footwork. So I think that's what we're trying to train here, is this kind of natural, seamless way to just kind of pivot into shooting right over top of a defender if you have a couple inches of an advantage. What's your take on this drill and then guided drills in general to teach post play?
Yeah, we did these regularly. What that means is what it means, right? Pre-practice stuff, and a lot of times the defender there would have the bag, the handbag, and we would teach the post to go down there and pop the bag, and take his spot. We wanted to hear the thud of the bag, so that we knew they were being physical and taking up their post positions. And yeah, they would do just the same kind of things that you're working on here. Your basic moves, right? Drop step baseline, drop step, inside, work in maybe an up and under there with that. Maybe face, different things you can do out of that. Really, really good stuff. Again, lots of reps in a short amount of time. It looks like it's easy. It's not, right? It will get you some conditioning when you're rotating three guys in there like that. If you're doing that for 3 or 4 minutes, they'll come away from there and they'll be sweating. But one of the things that I want to really focus on here, Matt, is your 90 shorts there. Is that you throwing those passes?
That is me.
Yeah, you got that Fab 5 Michigan short thing going on there. I like that.
Yeah. I've gotten into the pickleball scene more lately, and my shorts have changed. I'm rocking the shorts a little higher and tighter, but definitely I was influenced by the Allen Iverson era of basketball. Yeah. I was big into the Stephon Marbury versus Allen Iverson kind of player comparison there. I come down on the Stephon Marbury side. I was wrong on that one. But definitely the Iverson cornrows, tattoos, baggy shorts and stuff. I was a kid experiencing all that. And apparently when I was probably 27 years old in this video right here, I was still in that era of how I thought about the world. But things have changed. Things have changed a little bit, and I don't. Those shorts have come and gone a long time ago. But
let me do me a favor. I can pull out one of my old. I got a picture of me taking a jump shot in my senior night high school game against Akron St. Vincent St. Mary, and my shorts look a lot different than that, Coach Hack. They look a lot different. And my players that have come over to the house have looked at those, and every player I've ever shown it to were like, "Coach, what is up with those shorts, man? What is up?" So it's funny how things change and then sometimes come back. And but that's a great look. And I love the gym too. I can't help it, right? Because I grew up there, and we at Hoban we always played St. Thomas, and I had my high scoring game my senior year in that gym there. I look over there now, and I guess did they call that that one little statue over there? Didn't they start calling that 3-point Jesus when you were there?
Yeah, we had 3-point Jesus. You can't see it on the camera, but it is to the left of the stage here. And then when we would hit threes, the student section would all do like a 3-point Jesus chant. That was really fun.
That's awesome stuff, man. See, high school basketball, man, it really doesn't get any better. And it's funny because we do come from relatively the same area, right? Every time you start to show videos and we start talking about people, it brings back a lot of great memories. And I just hope today that coaches appreciate all the things that they're going through and really are enjoying, their time in this, because it really is fantastic stuff.
Yeah, coaching is there's downsides to coaching, but you can absorb those downsides really easy by appreciating all the goodness that is high school basketball. And when you forget about some of the little things like the student section coming together and providing a magical environment to play in, and having these kind of little, the student section chants and all that stuff. That's my encouragement to coaches, is to make sure you're appreciating all of the fantastic things about coaching high school basketball. Don't let the negative things get you down too much. Remember why you do it. But there's so many elements to coaching high school basketball that you can't get any other place. And that's why so many coaches are attracted to, staying in the profession for a long time, working with kids, helping kids, and getting some of those experiences that are so fun.
Absolutely. We had the Dirty Birds at Fairless. That was our student section, and they had T-shirts, and they all had their nicknames on their T-shirts. And my first pep rally at Fairless, when I first got that job, they made me an honorary Dirty Bird, and I had the T-shirt on underneath my shirt and tie, and I pulled the shirt and tie off at the pep rally, and it set the place on its edge. And from there on, we had a great relationship, our program, with those Dirty Birds, and they were a big part of the experience. You know what I mean? And sometimes you think as coach, you shouldn't acknowledge those things, but I disagree. I think you should acknowledge those things. I think it's part of the high school basketball experience, and it's something that can not just galvanize a school, but an entire community gets involved. And then you make your run, and these kids, they become celebrities in their own town, and they've got a chance to make an impact on that community that lasts really forever. If you go to Fairless, today, they're still talking about some of the things that we did back then. And two of my better players from my best teams there, Jordan Jennings and Jonah Manak, are now running the youth program there. You want to talk about paying it forward and passing it on.
Yeah.
It's just a great thing. And for all the coaches out there that maybe don't feel appreciated right now, trust me, if you're doing the job of that we all do, then you're appreciated.
Didn't you have a group that did the team-wide blonde hair dyeing or something, or shaved head or something like that? Did you do a shaved head or dye your hair for that?
Well, it's kind of funny, and I talk about that in my Rebuild thing that's getting ready to get released. I keep telling you about that. You're telling me it sounds like Bigfoot, but I'm done with it. You're going to get it today. But yeah, they dyed their hair at a team camp in West Virginia because we made the Final Four of the team camp tournament.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Coach, you're going to dye your hair now." They're looking at me right now, and you're like, "Kramer, are you kidding? Have you seen him? Have you looked in the mirror?" Right. The mirror right now tells me I don't have any hair, and part of it's because of those kids. But back then, I still had a full head of jet black hair. So I told them, kind of jokingly, "You know what, fellas, I'm not dyeing my hair or anything else for a summer league game. I'm glad you guys are excited, but I'm not doing it. But I'll tell you what, if we win the district championship, I'll let you shave my head in the locker room after the game that night right there at the Canton Fieldhouse." And I'd kind of forgotten about that deal that I made, right? Because first of all, nobody expected us to do that. We were still in the midst of a rebuilding program. We were getting closer, and I felt like we had a shot to do something, but I didn't know if it would be that, right? So as the story unfolds and it turns out, we do it. And I'd forgotten about the deal until I walked into the locker room and there was a TV camera in there with a bright light on. I'm like, what the heck's going on? And Jonah Manak, my 4-year point guard and captain, was standing there with a towel and a chair and a pair of clippers. And I remembered as soon as I saw what he had that I'd made that deal, and they did. They shaved my head bald right there in the locker room right after that game, right? Every last ounce of it right on the floor. And at the time, it kind of freaked me out because I was born with a full head of dark hair, but now really all it was doing was foreshadowing the rest of my life, right? So, but it made for a good side story. And again, this is part of the whole high school basketball experience, right? When you have those little things that are going on, they add to the story and they add to the memories. And those are the kind of things that you talk about 19 years later when you get together with those kids, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's important to keep those promises, to keep that trust with your team, and set something that all the players can rally behind, the community can rally behind, and then you got to go out there and coach the next game with that new hairdo of yours.
What it taught me was to be very careful about what you promise kids, because they're not going to forget, right? And I remember thinking, he can't be serious. I'm not doing this. I liked my hair when I had it. And I'm looking around at exits, and I thought, yeah, the only way out this door is through those clippers. So, and I sat down, and then the cool thing was my entire coaching staff did it too after me.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about an ugly group of human beings when we went on and coached that next game. That may have been why we couldn't get the ball in bounds at the end of the regional game, is what I'm thinking. It was bad, you know. It was really, really an ugly look back then. But you know what? We had a lot of fun with it. So
It was like Samson. You guys got your hair cut off and you forgot how to run press breakers.
I mean, that might have been what it was. I don't know, but it was. And I just, you talk about, man, you know, now it's like I can't imagine having hair, but like I remember then it was like I felt like I was naked the entire game I was coaching. There's no other way to say it. I mean, it just was so weird.
Boy, I fought it for a while, but there's no looking back once I took it all off. I just love getting out of the shower and not having to fool with it at all. And
Yeah.
yep, I tried to hang on a little bit too long, I think, and finally succumbed to it and never looking back.
No, when it's time, you know, and then you're saving a lot of time in the morning. And think of all the money you spent on hair products back in those days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no hair products, you know what I mean? It's just, it is what it is. And, you know, it's put a stocking cap on, you don't have to worry about pulling the hoodie off over your head, messing your hair. It's a great way to live. So I appreciate my Fairless teams for first shaving my head off, and then the rest of the teams that I've ever coached, making sure that it never came back.
Coach, thanks for your time this morning. I enjoyed doing 90 minutes on post drills. Let's connect up in a week or so again to do another one of these. How about that?
Sounds great, my man. Have a good day. Enjoy the hoops.
All right. See you, brother.